After the incredibly successful Ukrainian Operation Web, Russia flew the surviving aircraft as far away from Ukraine as possible. One of the strategic missile carriers was driven all the way to Chukotka, the maximum distance from Ukraine, writes military-analytical portal Defense Express. Analysts have drawn attention to recent satellite images of the military airbase and at the same time the civilian airport Anadyr in Chukotka. A publicly available image from the ESA Sentinel satellite on June the 4th shows that a fairly large aircraft has appeared on the military part of the airfield. Although the resolution of the image leaves much to be desired, the object was still identified as a Tu-160 strategic missile carrier. It was identified by its 55.7-meter wingspan and the characteristic shape of its fuselage. As analysts note, in recent months, the Russians have not used this airbase to park strategic missile carriers. Even on June the 2nd, the day after Operation Spiderweb, there were no Tu-60s there. Defense Express links the appearance of the aircraft at this airbase directly to Ukrainian strikes on Russian strategic aviation airfields. The Anadyr airbase is located 6,600 kilometers from Ukraine and only 500 from the United States, but getting there will only become possible somewhere closer to the 1930s, the experts write. They note that at this airbase, the aircraft is protected from sabotage, not so much by the maximum distance from Ukraine, but by the lack of roads that would connect the city of Anadyr with the rest of the Russian territory. This means that a truck with Ukrainian drones simply won't get there. This city is completely dependent on sea and air support. The practical use of even strategic aviation aircraft from such a remote airbase for strikes on Ukraine is more than questionable. Moreover, the very use of the Tu-160 for long-range strikes on Ukraine is not just episodic, but a rare occurrence, the analysts write. Defense Express also saw a certain irony in the fact that it is now safer for a Russian aircraft to be 500 kilometers from the United States than 1,700 kilometers from Ukraine.
After Ukraine hit Russian long-range airfields and delivered one of the most sensitive blows of the entire war, the Kremlin's nerves snapped. Former Russian Prime Minister Medvedev essentially revealed Moscow's true goals on Telegram, stating that the talks in Istanbul are not needed for a compromise peace on unrealistic conditions invented by someone, but for a speedy victory and the complete destruction of the neo-Nazi government. These words were a direct admission that the negotiations were nothing more than a smokescreen. Against the backdrop of huge losses in aviation and unsuccessful rounds in Istanbul, the Russian leadership seemed to have decided to play for broke at the cost of the final collapse of its international reputation. The backlash was immediate. U.S. Senator Lindsey Graham publicly thanked Medvedev for a rare moment of truth, saying, "Thank you for your honesty. The whole world now understands that Putin and Russia are not interested in peace." This attack was not just an ironic remark. In the American political system, such statements are used as a basis for new sanctions decisions. According to information from Congress, a group of senators is already preparing to expand the sanctions list against Russian banks, industry, and suppliers of dual-use technologies. Experts note that this emotional tone, characteristic of Medvedev in recent years, is this time caused not by rhetoric, but by real weakness. After the loss of up to 20 strategic bombers, according to U.S. intelligence estimates, the Kremlin has found itself in a vulnerable position. Instead of explanations, there are threats. Instead of diplomacy, there is a belligerent pose. Political scientists call Medvedev's statement an admission of failure that will only accelerate Russia's international isolation. Medvedev not only demonstrated the inadequacy of the Kremlin's approach to negotiations, but also gave the US and its allies a clear reason to tighten their policies. And if Washington had long been looking for a legal justification for new sanctions, now the vice chairman of the Russian Security Council himself has given it to them voluntarily, against the backdrop of yet another failure in the war. Recall, SBU announced the official losses of enemy aircraft after Operation Web. The department's press service published a statement stating that as a result of today's attack by Ukrainian drones, the enemy lost 34% of its strategic cruise missile carriers. The total cost of the damaged aircraft was $7 billion. The department promised to provide details of the operation later. Defense Minister Boris Pistorius said on Thursday that Germany aims to enlarge the country's army by some 50,000 to 60,000 troops. We expect that synchronous with the build-up of the capacities, and I can only repeat that a draft system is useless right now, because we don't have the needed capacities, neither in the barracks nor in training. That's why we need to increase these capacities. Until then it's volunteers, he told reporters in Brussels, Belgium. According to Associated Press, it comes as NATO defense ministers are set to approve purchasing targets for stocking up on weapons and military equipment to better defend Europe, the Arctic and the North Atlantic, as part of a U.S. push to ramp up security spending. The capability targets lay out goals for each of the 32 nations to purchase priority equipment like air defense systems, long-range missiles, artillery, ammunition, drones and strategic enablers such as air-to-air refueling, heavy air transport and logistics. Each nation's plan is classified, so details are scarce. Spurred on by their own security concerns, European allies and Canada have already been ramping up military spending, including arms and ammunition purchases, since Russia launched a full-scale invasion of Ukraine in 2022. At the same time, some allies balk at U.S. demands to invest 5% of their gross domestic product in defense, 3.5% on core military spending and 1.5% on the roads, bridges, airfields and seaports needed to deploy armies more quickly when they have already struggled to grow their budgets to 2% of GDP. The new targets are assigned by NATO based on a blueprint agreed upon in 2023, the military organization's biggest planning shakeup since the Cold War, to defend its territory from an attack by Russia or another major adversary. Under those plans, NATO would aim to have up to 300,000 troops ready to move to its eastern flank within 30 days, although experts suggest the Allies would struggle to muster those kinds of numbers.
Ja, meine Damen und Herren, ich hoffe, Sie haben alle gut geschlafen. Und für uns, für Deutschland bedeutet das, wir übernehmen traditionell, und das wird nicht anders sein dieses Mal, das zweitgrößte Paket an Fähigkeiten innerhalb der NATO. Und wir kommen, und das haben wir mehrfach betont, unserer Verantwortung nach als stärkster Volkswirtschaft in Europa. Und ich nenne natürlich keine Details aus einem einfachen Grund. Ich würde mir ungern von potenziellen Aggressoren in meine Karten schauen lassen. Also wir gehen davon aus, das ist aber auch nur eine Daumengröße, um es klar zu sagen, dass wir rund 50.000 bis 60.000 Soldatinnen und Soldaten in den stehenden Streitkräften mehr brauchen als heute. Und gleichzeitig wird sich die Frage natürlich stellen, reicht der neue Wehrdienst aus über die nächsten Jahre? Wir gehen davon aus, dass synchron zum Aufwuchs der Kapazitäten, und ich kann es immer nur wiederholen, uns nützt eine Wehrpflicht jetzt gar nichts, weil wir die Kapazitäten weder in den Kasernen noch in der Ausbildung haben. Deswegen müssen diese Kapazitäten aufwachsen. Bis dahin gilt Freiwilligkeit.